Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. Is communism an ideology? Well, that's a huge and important question. Why? Because communism isn't just some dusty old theory you read about in a textbook. It's one of the most powerful forces that shape the world we live in today. To really get a grip on it, we need to untangle three different things that often get mashed together. Think of it like a three-layer cake. You can't understand the whole cake by just looking at one layer. First, you have the idea of communism, the pure philosophical concept. This goes way back even before Karl Marx, but he's the guy who really put it on the map. He looked at the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century and saw a world deeply divided. On one side, you had the bourgeoisie, the factory owners, the people with all the capital and power. On the other, you had the proletariat, the workers who had nothing to sell but their own labor. Marx saw this as a system of exploitation where the rich got richer by paying the workers less than the value they created. His solution, laid out in works like the Communist Manifesto, was a radical one. He envisioned a classless society, a world with no private property, where the means of production, the factories, the land, the machines are owned by everyone collectively. In this ideal communist society, the state would eventually wither away because it would no longer be needed to protect the interests of one class over another. Everyone would contribute what they could and take what they needed. It's a vision of ultimate equality and cooperation, a world without exploitation or poverty. That's the first layer, the utopian idea. Now for the second layer, the revolutionary movements that tried to put this idea into practice. The theory was one thing, but making it happen was a whole different ball game. These movements were led by revolutionaries like Vladimir Lenin in Russia, Mao Zedong in China, and Fidel Castro in Cuba. These weren't just thinkers. They were doers, men of action who believed that history wouldn't change on its own. They argued that the ruling class would never give up power peacefully, so a violent revolution was necessary. Lenin, for example, adapted Marx's ideas. He argued that you needed a vanguard party, a small disciplined group of professional revolutionaries to lead the working class and seize power. This was a major shift. Marx's idea was more of a spontaneous uprising of the masses. Lenin's was a planned, strategic takeover. These movements were fueled by real-world grievances, poverty, war, oppression. They promised a better future, a paradise on earth for the downtrodden. They inspired millions with their message of liberation and equality, and they were incredibly effective at mobilizing people to fight and die for the cause. This is the second layer, the fiery, often violent struggle for power. Finally, we get to the third layer, the states and systems that ruled in the name of communism. This is what most people think of when they hear the word. The Soviet Union, the People's Republic of China, and other countries in the Eastern Bloc. After the revolution succeeded, these leaders faced the monumental task of actually building a communist society, and this is where the ideal crashed headfirst into reality. Instead of the state withering away, it became more powerful than ever. To enforce their radical changes, these regimes became totalitarian. They established one-party rule, crushed all political opposition, and created secret police forces to monitor their citizens. Private property was abolished, but instead of being owned by the people, everything was controlled by the state, which was in turn controlled by the party. They implemented centrally planned economies where government bureaucrats in the capital city decided everything: what factories should produce, how much they should produce, and what the prices should be. The results were often disastrous. Without the price signals and competition of a market, these economies were incredibly inefficient. They often led to massive shortages of basic goods, long lines for bread, and a lack of innovation. In the pursuit of creating an agricultural utopia, forced collectivization policies led to catastrophic famines, like the Holodomor in Ukraine and the Great Leap Forward in China, which killed millions upon millions of people. And what about the promised equality? In practice, a new class emerged, the party elite. High-ranking officials enjoyed privileges and luxuries that were completely out of reach for ordinary citizens. The dream of a classless society never materialized. Instead, one form of hierarchy was simply replaced by another, and the promise of liberation. It turned into mass surveillance, labor camps like the Gulag, and the suppression of any form of free expression, art, literature, even personal thought that didn't align with the party's official ideology. So when you look back, you have these three distinct but connected things. You have the beautiful utopian idea of a world without exploitation. You have the passionate revolutionary movements that fought to make that idea a reality. And you have the brutal totalitarian states that were the actual result. You can't understand the history of the 20th century without seeing how these three layers interact. You can't dismiss the power of the idea just because of the failures of the states. The dream of equality and justice is a powerful motivator. But you also can't ignore the horrific human cost of the attempts to build that utopia by force. The revolutionary movements weren't just fighting for an idea. They were fighting for power, and the states they built weren't just flawed implementations of a good idea. They were systems of control that created their own logic and their own new forms of inequality and oppression. Only when you see all three together, the dream, the struggle, and the reality, do you begin to understand what communism really was. It's a story of hope and horror, of idealism and tyranny, of the incredible power of ideas to shape human history, for better and for worse. It's a complex and often tragic story, but one we absolutely have to understand to make sense of the world we've inherited. Thanks for watching. If you found this breakdown helpful, be sure to like the video and subscribe for more deep dives into the ideas that shaped our world. See you next time.